Welcome everyone to our very first roundtable meeting. It's going to be our very first time doing a roundtable with an actual writer who we're going to be working with. If you don't know, my name is Rebecca. This is Virgil, aka Ray. He's going to be taking lead on today's project. So everyone, please welcome Ray. He's going to be taking over. I just wanted to step in and say it's still my channel, but Ray is going to be leading this. So pay attention to him.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. So with me are obviously Rebecca, co-founder of Round Table Editorial, as well as Emily Drez and Lacey Felker and myself. We're all co-founders of Round Table Editorial. And this is going to be our first roundtable, like Rebecca said, with a live author. So Miss Jenny Cook has volunteered her services to us, and we're going to hopefully give her some great feedback on her work. Just as an overview for that work, I had to say that the story was pretty delightful in the fact that you talk a lot about the story itself is about like a multi-generational family, right? So a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter, and I thought it was very neat that it didn't follow quite a list of a stereotypical story like that. Like there was a lot of bitterness involved in the story, and I thought that was very unique in its take as far as the youngest generation almost battling with the older generation. And I thought that was very fresh, at least in my opinion. As a younger person, I don't really get to read too many things like that from that point of view. So that was delightful. Just an overview on some of my thoughts. And then I'll kind of let all of our members go ahead and take it away on different things as far as that they've seen in the work. The narrator herself was a little not brutal in the sense, but more so dissociated from some of the emotion around her. So we kind of took a look at that and decided that we wanted just to have a little bit more connection with the actions that were happening. Like a lot of times the narrator it'd be these one-off little statements and then move into dialogue, but those little statements added up into something quite bitter by the end. I mean, even the very first line that the narrator talks about with her grandmother moving in is, it's a worthy sacrifice. Well, at best that's almost an indifference, and at worst it's an inconvenience. And then that moves to the last page, where the last page is they're talking about the death of the grandmother, and the narrator says, oh, and then, have you called the coroner yet? And that's a stark difference as far as attitude goes. So we were a little hesitant with that attitude moving forward, because it seemed like the narrator was a bit brusque in their take on the situation. Now, saying that, I will say the repetition used in the story was fantastic. I mean, you basically take 3 to 4 core elements and you repeat them, but you don't do it to the point where it makes us sick of reading it. It was very balanced, I would say, in that regard. I mean, you kind of repeat the same scene with minimal differences, and then on page 12, your repetition gets really tight, right? Like it's just 3 to 4 words per line. And it's basically the same thing, but by that point, we know how the process goes. We know the scene that's going to happen. So instead of fleshing out an entire extra scene for us to read, you give it to us to short and sweet, and then it transitions into something of a climax. And I actually really appreciated that as far as a rising action, because it kind of speeds up our perception of what's happening in this world you've built. I actually really appreciated that. I'd love to slide it over to Emily Drez and let her talk about kind of some of the radical changes that we wanted to talk about as far as like pacing and the actual structure of the physical work itself. We wanted to kind of maybe play with some things and move a few things around. So I just want to kind of hear from her and see how that would affect your story and see why we maybe think it would be a positive change. So Emily, go ahead. Also, screen sharing is enabled. So Emily, if you wanted to pull up anything, please feel free.
All right. So I have had the privilege actually to read this story. I don't know, like last semester, Jenny wrote it for a class that we were taking together. So I'm very familiar with the way she structures her stories and with her narrative voices, all that good stuff. And this was one of like my favorite stories that she's written, especially with how personal it feels, and also with how almost how it feels a little daunting the entire time. Like you can tell something's going on, but it just, the whole story just kind of like leads you into the hook, like at the very end, that twist. So I felt like, I personally am a big fan of dialogue, and I felt like the easiest way, I think, to really pack a punch, I found on page, let's see, you know, I had it right up. So the story starts with saying that the grandmother moves in on a Friday, and then after that, it's kind of like taking you through the motions of scene setting and all that, which I think is really good. But I think what would have really helped as the regarding impact, sorry, I'm trying to find it and talk at the same time, was to start with some interesting dialogue that kind of hooks the reader into there's something going on, but we don't quite know it, which is kind of a theme throughout the whole story. So on page, it's actually the first page. So the first line of dialogue is, "Look, Granny," you say as you point out the window, "there's a cute little bird on the feeder." And so I had the idea of putting that scene from "Look, Granny" all the way down to the 3 little dashes that show up on the second page to mark the next scene. It ends with "feel like an eternity." I thought that would have been a good way to start the story, and then transition into the motions of, okay, like this is what's happening, like the grandmother's moving in, something's kind of iffy, something is obviously wrong with the grandmother, we can tell that something's not quite right. There was another scene that I felt like could have used a bit more dialogue as well, because I feel like this piece has a lot more movement, and we could take that movement out and replace it with dialogue to add tension. And it was the scene in which the grandmother was struggling to say a certain word.
I believe it was "where," correct?
Yeah, it was definitely
Yeah,
a W word. It was something like that. I can't find it specifically in all my comments, but basically the way it goes is that the narrator is telling the reader that the grandmother is struggling to say the word where I feel like it would have more of an impact if we had, like, in quotation as a piece of dialogue, the grandmother's like, what, like you can tell she's stuttering. Just some things like that with dialogue, and with like shifting some scenes around, maybe reforming the first scene a little bit to give a little better exposition. But overall, I enjoyed how the story flowed. I didn't feel like I had to touch the structure too much to get the point across, but most of my concern was in, like, I just think instead of telling us, it's like show, don't tell. It's like, you know, the first thing you learn in your writing class is just, instead of like telling us the character's doing this, show us through like action and dialogue. Oh, there's another one. But yeah, basically like show us, you know, what the grandmother is struggling with regarding like her disease, rather than telling us she's struggling. Another example I had was how it's actually the third line in the story, if I can count correctly, don't quote me on that, but it's in the first paragraph. And one of the sentences is, "Nothing about this situation is ideal, least of all the odd design quirks the architect gave this house." And so this was an opportunity I think you could seize to bring the grandmother into it. Like, okay, so the architecture is weird, but how does this relate to the story? It kind of felt like it took the emphasis away from Granny, the character, very quickly, because it's right after we mentioned that she's moving in. So I suggested, you know, maybe she can make a comment about the weird architecture and the uneven flooring. Something like that, where you can kind of draw the readers in and hint at she's a little irritable, maybe senile. There's something going on, there's tension, all the stuff that I've been harping on. Tension obviously is my thing. In dialogue. And I think that's kind of about all I had to say with structure. Oh, so the line about her stuttering on the word where is actually on page 2. It's the very last line where her voice falters after each attempt at saying where. So I said spelling it out with dialogue would give it a greater impact. Yeah, that's about it for me. As much as you can add in there, it can't hurt. Less movement, more action, I would say.
Great, thank you, Emily. Thank you, I appreciate that. So yeah, I'm gonna actually go ahead and pull up a copy just for you know, for all of us to kind of follow along a little easier. Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind kind of like taking the next step and taking over on some of your thoughts on the work, that would be great.
For sure. So Ray kind of assigned me with imagery, which is great because I love a good imagery moment. So basically, when I started reading, I started going line by line. And then I realized that it could use a clean sweep of a couple things. So one of the tricks I really love using for myself and for other people who I recommend tips to is to go through your sentences and notice when you use the word and. Because if you're using the word and, it's likely that the structure of the actual sentence, Emily, you just went over structure, but this could also help with imagery, is to take out that and build the sentence stronger so that you can add more imagery in instead of using, you know, adjectives and ands. So that's something that I would really love to just do a clean sweep so that you can clean it up, shorten the word count a little bit so you can go back and add the imagery if you're wanting to keep this story more short and concise. That is a great way to do it. And I do agree with Emily in that I think it could use imagery to highlight the moods and the tone of the story. So the example she had where she was actually talking about the architecture of the house, I really loved that moment, but I almost wanted it to mirror Granny and what she is going through and how she feels old maybe, or maybe she doesn't feel old. Maybe it's this dichotomy of her feeling young, but knowing she's old in some sort of way, like in those lucid moments where she realizes time is passing. I almost wanted the house to mirror that because you use the house so much throughout, and it could add so much to the building of this character who is really declining in her mental health. And I think it could add this weird sympathy to the Granny if the house is really part of her. It represents her psyche declining. So that was something I really, really wanted to see you zoom in on. And that way it can actually bring you closer into the scene. You're doing a second person dialogue here, and it's really beautiful. And I think that if you can zoom it in even farther, then you're really golden. And I think the imagery can really, really set that off here. Especially with the trains, I would love, and this is separate from the architecture, but if you could use the trains and the description of the trains to describe almost the mood that the character is in as she is bidding on them. Like if one is really shiny and sparkly and pretty, maybe it's her trying to feel better about her situation. And I almost wanted that to be exaggerated in a major way. Let's see. Let me actually pull up my notes because I know I had an extra one. Sorry, I have like multiple documents up here for you, Jenny. Oh, and the other thing I would really, really, really enjoy, and this is one of the major things, if you do nothing else, I would really push this, is to highlight the similarities between the characters. Like you talk a lot about eyes and mouths on the women, and I would love if it was almost a mirror image so that you're seeing this character who is no longer herself, and yet there are aspects of the other characters there. Like if it's the mother's mouth speaking on the granny's face, and you can sort of highlight those moments because you have a lot of conflicting feelings with this character, which I actually love, because it is conflicting when you have a family member going through a disease like this. You're like, respectfully, I want you to pass peacefully. Because it's really frustrating watching you not be yourself anymore. It's frustrating for me, it's frustrating for you, but I also love you. And I think that if she can identify those key points of similarities, like it's my mom's mouth on her face moving, then you can almost voice why she is still feeling this connection to someone who is no longer the person she loved, because she's seeing the people she still loves on that face, and she's seeing herself still on that face. And it's hard to let go of that because it's a history and it's a living history. So I really, really wanted you to hit on those points hard because it could really drag the reader in and then kill them at the end. And I think that the story is very, very close to it if you can just zone in on those tiny little details. But those are my notes on that. That's a brief overview. Of course, you're going to be getting a more detailed note version from each of us. I think Ray's going to put together like a book Bible. But with that, I believe it's Lacey's turn.
Yep. Lacey, feel free to share if you want to pull anything up and pull examples. Go ahead.
All right, so Jenny, I'm gonna just go ahead and say this is where your story is at. It is not digital. And I did not type it up because it just did not cross my mind. But let's see. So I would like to, let's see. I'd like to go to the first page. And I don't know if I can do that even though, yeah. So on the first page, you start with like very early on, where is it? You get very early on, you get introduced to the trains, right? So there's a line that dismantled pieces lay boxed in the hall closet, each replica, locomotive, indefinitely derailed. So, you know, obviously, like, I feel like model trains aren't that common anymore, but the main character makes a point to bring up the train. And so immediately I got the feeling that, you know, the model trains were important to them. And then as the story goes, you know, you get the main character on eBay, you know, like bidding on these trains. And then there's also the birds. So Ray tasked me. So Ray tasked me with the metaphorical aspect of the story and like the larger picture. And so the two things that really stood out to me were the trains and the birds. However, I will say that, you know, so you get the birds in the morning, like whenever everyone's like sitting around the table and stuff like that. Sorry, my cat's right here at my leg. So you get the birds in the morning, whenever they're like sitting around wanting to have coffee. And I thought that the birds would be a bigger deal than how they're written, because it's clear that the main character knows a lot about the birds, and then you find that their mom knows a lot about the birds. And it's some of the scenes where the birds are like fighting, and there's, you know, like this one bird that like comes in and kind of like pushes, you know, like a smaller bird away, that made me think that it was trying to be a parallel to what the main character was going through. However, you don't really get that like in depth. But I will say, I think the trains and the birds work as like, sending messages. And after, I finished reading the story, my mind immediately went back, to each replica locomotive derailed, because the main character's life kind of got derailed whenever the grandmother came in. So I think you have a really like good foundation for expanding on it and like really working it into the story. And I really like the trains and the birds, I will say. And I found myself like kind of looking for the similarities like the more I read, anytime like the birds got brought up. So I feel like that's like my main critique. It's like they're there, you feel like something's going to happen with them, but then nothing really does. It's like, you can kind of like feel that you want something to happen with them, but then at the end you're just kind of like, well then what was with the trains? For lack of a better word. Emily, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, I just had an idea, but I was gonna wait till you were done.
I'm done.
Okay. So just kind of bouncing off of what you were saying about like the metaphors and the symbolism. So I think one way to really harp on the importance of the symbols in the story, because you can tell they're supposed to be important, but it's kind of like scraping a little bit. I can definitely see it in the trains with the whole derailing thing, but one thing that I have been really playing with in my stories is the rule of 3. So if you want a symbol to be important, you have it pop up like 3 times in the story. I don't know how that works in like a novel. It might have to be like bigger for a novel, but I know like in a short story, typically 3 it's always a satisfying number, just in life in general. But especially in stories, that's like the best way you can really show how important something is, especially whenever like it starts off small, so you can mention once. I think actually this was one of my critiques as well with the model train ordering off of eBay, was that it was only mentioned twice in the story, and I really wanted to see it get brought up one more time. So like in the beginning, it's like, yeah, like I'm betting on this train on eBay. The second time you add like a little bit more detail to it, make it a little bit more frantic. And then the last time you bring it up is whenever we really see that symbolism come in. But yeah, that's just something that I've really learned how to incorporate in short story writing whenever you're talking symbolism and metaphors and stuff like that.
I hope you don't mind if I go off Emily real quick, Ray. Yes, everything Emily just said, on point. I would actually love to see the third mention of the symbols come in at the end, and have this sort of moment of almost disembodiment of the character where they almost dissociate and they kind of just like zoom into these 2 details. Like, I don't know how exactly you might do this, but one idea I might have is to have a bird building a nest inside one of the discarded model trains from her childhood in the yard or something, to show sort of like this change, this shift in where their lives are going.
I would also like to add, and I can't believe I like forgot to say this earlier, but I will say, it's mentioned at least once that like, trains go around a track, like there's fixed, rails and stuff like that. So like it just kind of keeps going around. And then something you did really well was, the main character was stuck in a loop, right? And so that really made me think about the toy trains that were discarded. And so I really liked that. That really worked. But I don't know if like other readers might get that connection between, because the line where, you know, you say like, you know, trains go on the same track, like it's a fixed route and stuff like that, is really good if, you know, you're looking for it, I feel like, as a whole when it comes to the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, piggybacking off of everybody, the way I always think about the rule of three, first of all, is, you know, once is an event, twice is a coincidence, and three times is purposeful. So like that's kind of like your line. And I thought you did that very, very, very well with the other events, slaps, the milkshakes, the, you know, the hamburgers, the events that happen, the conflicts. Um, but yeah, I think fleshing out the birds metaphor would be great. I think, you know, doing a little work here and there on train. Now I will say on the train metaphor, you had a fantastic wording. Let me see if I can find it. And here we go. How dare she derail your lives like this? Fantastic, fantastic wordplay. I mean, you know, you talk about the trains and then we're focused on the grandmother. You know, you just have this very intense scene where basically you're at your wit's end, or the narrator's at their wit's end, and then derail, you bring it all the way back to kind of like what you brought up in the first scene with the train. I thought that was fantastic. Speaking on that very scene though, there's a mention on pages 13 and 14 right here, actually, the one that we have highlighted. And I note it's an extremely interesting twist because it sounds like the narrator is going to kill the grandmother. And that is a step, I must say. And I quite liked it, actually. I really, really, really liked that because, like I was saying earlier, it caught me off guard in the best kind of way. I was not expecting this when I started the story about, you know, 3 generations of women living under the same roof. So I actually really liked what you did here, and a suggestion by Emily actually made me even think this could even be a little better. Now, this last line here, notice how we struck through it. Emily actually suggested this because she said striking through this line and then jumping into the revelation that the grandmother has passed, well, that could almost be misconstrued by a reader as murder. And I actually quite like that twist. It's not necessarily obvious, and it's not necessarily something that you think about first. I mean, it took me reading Emily's comments to really get the gist of what she was trying to go for. But when she noticed, like, hey, if you cut this line, like there's an inkling in someone's brain that this death could not have been of natural causes. And I think that is a fantastic edit. And I think that you should kind of look into that, because you build this bitterness with the narrator throughout. And if someone wants to say that it culminates with that happening, well, then, you know, then that is a reading of the work. And absolutely. I just really liked how many directions you could go with what you have here. You know, but yeah, fleshing some things out, adding some color, adding some pop here and there, adding some description that's more personal and less, you know, less just facial, I guess, is a good word for it. Just more of a color of something, you know, like instead of just design quirks, like kind of dive into that. Tell me what you mean by that. So things like that can be fleshed out and ultimately add a lot to this story. I mean, you already have the bones of a really great story here, especially with your culminating twist here of conflict. I mean, I thought that was a fantastic way to actually bring this story to some sort of conclusion after being stuck in such a loop. I thought that was a very good way to do that. So hats off to you for that. But yeah, these are really most of our big notes, just injecting emotion into descriptions, kind of trying to let the narrator feel more in tune with some of the other characters. I think would also be a great tool. Rebecca, would you want to say a word?
Yeah, I just have a little bonus for you, just a fun little exercise if you want it, just for my little writing heart. If you could go through at the end of every one of your major scenes and cut out the last paragraph, not paragraph, no, don't cut out the last paragraph, the last sentence, just the last sentence, because I noticed at the end you have these really hitting scenes, and then you add on an extra sentence that almost explains the scene and how they're feeling in the scene. I just want you to cut it and let us assume that they're feeling something traumatic. And if you don't like it, obviously put it back in. But just for funsies, just for a little exercise, cut the last sentence, and see if it hits a little bit harder. Like if we can assume that the emotion is much bigger than a sentence can even encompass.
Great advice, Rebecca. So yeah, I mean, anybody else? Would anybody like to say anything first before I kind of turn it over to Jenny for a moment? No? All right, great. So Jenny, this is your time just to say a few words, whatever really you'd like. If maybe we didn't quite understand what you were going for, or maybe the bitterness was entirely intentional to kind of set up for that ending scene, please kind of let us know.
Thank y'all. So I haven't really thoroughly looked at this story since I finished this draft a month or two ago, but some of the bitterness was very intentional because Emily mentioned it. It's a story and a premise that's very close to my heart because, I have a relative going through it and it's just hard to watch. And it's that culminating scene that you both pointed to is it's just the bitter fantasy almost of someone who's been stuck in a situation that they just can't break out of. And that's like the point for me when I write fiction, and especially stuff that plays with speculative sci-fi-ish ideas and motives, because it's like this is a time loop. It's like the idea that what is the thing to break out of a loop, and the idea that fiction is supposed to take us to the extremes that we would never want to go to in real life. But no, classic Emily to suggest murder as a solution. But no, y'all are absolutely on point with the imagery. I tend to throw in just whatever's on my mind at the time that feels like it correlates to the story, and then flesh it back out later. And the rule of three, you put it in great terms about like one, I can't remember the exact phrasing you used, which is 1 and 2 and 3, but absolutely true. But I really appreciate, I can just even see from the what we've got screen shared right now, it's like, yes, that's going to be great. That's going to be awesome. And I really do appreciate it because it's like sometimes you get to the point where you don't know where to go forward with a piece. So, it still needs a little bit of fine tuning, and y'all have given me so many ways to proceed with the fine tuning. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I speak for all of us when we say it was great to read this. It was great to actually read your writing again in general, really. I will say, I think one little tiny thing we missed, and it's not, anything major, but it just, since I have it here in front of my face, I'll go ahead and tell you. So some of the wording that the narrator uses sometimes to describe events is a little odd as far as like the situations. And I get it, that's just kind of like the voice that you've kind of written with, and that I can really see you writing in. But this specifically is like, I believe the first time that the milkshakes were mentioned by the mother, and the first time the mother actually handed the narrator a milkshake, she said, "Delighted to discover." I remember that sticking in my brain very, very, very obviously, because it sounds good almost in terms of, like it kind of flows well, but that moment I think could be tuned in a much better way to kind of describe the emotional aspect of it. Delighted to discover also is a bit almost highbrow as far as like what is happening. I mean, a bit of an emotional moment just happened. So kind of try and slow that language down a little bit, I would say, and try to be more, not necessarily casual, but just more open to like, okay, well, if this narrator just had this thing happen, like, you're not going to think about being delighted to discover them. You know what I mean? Like that's very pretty wording, but at the end of the day, like it should matter more on what the narrator is feeling about the incident than what they were. Do you understand what I'm kind of trying to get across to you?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Fantastic. I kind of had trouble wording that myself, but as long as you kind of know and we're on the same page, then that's great. But yeah, some of the wording was just a little odd sometimes. Some of the thought processes were a little heavy and almost a little poetic. But other than that, I mean, I pretty much enjoyed this narrator because it was a little bit of a different take. There was a lot of bitterness there. And usually when people talk about family and works and things like that, it's either 100% love or 100% hate, right? Like it's harder to have a give and take in a story. And I think if you have a little more give, I think this could be a great balance between, you know, obviously things are difficult between these characters, but there is still some sort of connection there. So yeah, that is it from me. And I think that's pretty much, Lacey, you got something?
Yeah, just real quick
Go
with
ahead.
like what you said, it's either like, you know, you love them or you hate them. But I think like one of the main reasons why I really loved this character was because like it really seemed natural. Like it seemed like a character that, you know, would think how, you know, a real person does. Because, you know, we all have like relatives that we can't really stand, but like, you know, we're also nice to at the same time, or like, you know, like someone's going through something. And so like a family member, so then you like are nice to them, even if they're like rude to you. And you just kind of like roll with that and like go, okay, you know, like you're like my aunt or my uncle or my grandmother, like I'll just deal with you because, you know, you're my family. And I think that like really hit home for me. So yeah, thanks for pointing that little bit out, Ray.
Yeah, I thought that was super interesting. Just, you know, the whole thing you have going with 3 generations in one roof is that something I think a lot of people these days relate to as well. But yeah, Jenny, I mean, I know that this is a very limited taste of what we kind of want to do with Roundtable, and you know, obviously, we hope to kind of see you around in the future as far as editing goes. Like, I would, for one, would love to edit your work in the future. Um, but as far as like our process and you know, kind of like how we've been in contact with you, how we've set this all up, like, is there something you think we could improve on in the future, or something you think we could streamline to be better? I know things have been kind of odd with the holidays in between, but please give us your thoughts.
I'm hard pressed to think of anything in specific, especially since this was, in a lot of ways, helping y'all get the process under your belts. But y'all have been really great, very professional with this. Honestly, the only thing I would think of is maybe a bit more communication in between the submission and the actual roundtable. But again, you mentioned there was also the holidays and again the learning curve of this process. But and potentially sending in the Google Doc of the changes a little bit sooner, in maybe like 12 hours or so, just to have time to digest it before the actual roundtable. But other than that, like, y'all have been great.
Yeah, I actually take blame for that one. I was supposed to do that at least last night, and it completely slipped my mind. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I mean, that's very constructive, and you're also been very understanding of like what it's like for us to kind of try and get this off the ground. So we appreciate you a ton, Jenny. You really have no idea how much this means for us. Rebecca, Emily, Lacey, anything else from y'all?
No, I thought for our first roundtable, it was a lot of fun. It reminded me of what we used to do in school a little bit, but a little bit more highbrow. It felt just really good, honestly.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. And you know, last but not least, Jenny, as far as like moving forward with this piece specifically, you know what, obviously you haven't really had the draft that long, and again, that is on me, but as far as like, what would you like to do with this piece? I mean, are you kind of, would you look at shopping it once it's kind of been glossed over a few more times, or?
Probably. I haven't really shopped around or submitted many works to journals. That's partially because I just, when I do have time to write, it was only ever for workshop classes. So there's very few things that I have to send out in the first place. But like I said, this story is what, like, it's one of the few things that I'm like, I sit down, I'm like, yeah, I'm really proud of this, and I'm really eager to dive into the fine tuning of it. I still have these like printed out and pulled up.
Yep.
So potentially, yeah. I don't know if it's worth time doing it, but I guess that would be the point. Most things I write just go and they stay in this binder and they don't leave.
Well, Jenny, I think I speak for all of us when I say that if you do throw some time into this and kind of, you know, play with our edits a little bit, I think you should definitely look at least putting this piece out there somewhere. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of mags, it seems, that are taking submissions every day. There's tons of publishing houses that are looking for things. And especially with some of the themes that you have going in here, I really think that this could find a home somewhere very easily. So I would just recommend you at least go ahead and look. I know Lacey is on top of magazine writing Twitter, so she could probably send you 100 different places that have submissions open right now. But I would encourage you to go ahead and do that, because I actually genuinely think that this story has a lot of themes going in it that are very readable, and I mean very widespread enough for people to relate to. I mean, I don't know anything about model trains, but I love the metaphor that you carried throughout the story with it. I mean, it was quite literally a vehicle for you to advance the story, and I thought that you did that very well. So yeah, I think that's it from us at Round Table Editorial. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank y'all.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing, and I'll go ahead and Rebecca, do you want to do like an outro or anything?
If you want to do a fun little thing where we show our website on the screen share to close out, that'd be really spicy.
Yeah, now that we're official, and it's actually going to pull up when I type it in.
I mean, otherwise we're going to be announcing our raffle winners probably today.
That is true.
So, you know, keep an eye out on the Instagram.
All right, there you go, Rebecca. It should be up.
Cool. Yeah, welcome to our website. This is it. I don't know if you heard the little ding dong behind me, but that was my phone telling me that someone new is on our website, which is really creepy, but I promise I don't know who you are. It doesn't tell me anything other than someone's on there. Yeah, a lot of time and tears went into this, so I hope you guys like it and visit it, please.
Absolutely. All right. Well,
so questions, go there. It also has a contact form, so if you can't answer your questions there, you can email us.
Yeah, absolutely. Please feel free to drop any kind of question as far as what our process is. If you kind of don't get enough from the website, we'll be glad to explain. So that's it from us at RTE. Till next time.